What's going on, Johnny Nation? Welcome to episode 175 of the Eye on the Storm podcast. My name is David Barrow, and this was the last big opportunity remaining. This was St. John's last chance to salvage their non-conference results, a chance at a win that should have aged well over the next 3 months. After 20 minutes, the offense wasn't great, but the defense surely was. Red Storm held a 32-25 lead over the Wildcats and were just 20 minutes away from leaving Catlanta with a win. And then, in a blink of an eye, it was all over, as the St. John's offense was non-existent. They turned the ball over 8 times, as they could also only score 8 times from the floor. And the defense that seemingly traveled from the first 3 games of this winning streak with the Red Storm into the first half against Kentucky vanished in a New York minute, as Kentucky scored 53 in the second stanza and got their first win over a ranked opponent, 78-66. Both Kentucky and St. John's came into this game being called disappointing. Both teams all with their losses to top 25 foes, and both being ranked top 10 in the preseason AP poll. These teams had expectations. But when the final horn sounded, there was one team with a win over a ranked opponent, and the other getting on a plane, headed home to New York, wondering about the reality that is, they are now the most disappointing team left standing in the sport. St. John's wilted in the second half. They were outscored by 19, but it felt like 119. Kentucky completely shut off St. John's water in the second half, and the Red Storm could not muster up any semblance of offense, much like the Auburn game in Las Vegas. They let another marquee game, in which they had a double-digit lead, slip right through their fingers. I am joined by Justin Kraber, as always, and the two who are back from Atlanta, Zach Brazil of the New York Post and Kevin Connelly of StormThePaint.com. Fellas, Justin, I'll start with you. Your take on the 12-point loss for St. John's in an outcome that felt a lot worse than what the score read at the end.
When you went through this schedule during the offseason, you had certain games circled, and you didn't think that the season was going to absolutely depend on those games, but those are the ones that you highlighted and said, this is what could catapult a team into that top 2 or 3 seed in the NCAA tournament. This was one of those games. And after the first half, I think that you saw one of 2 things that could happen. This was either going to be a blowout St. John's win if they started hitting shots in the second half, or Kentucky was going to make a run and make this a miserable game for St. John's fans. And unfortunately, that's what you got in the second half. And when I take the 30,000-foot view and I look at this game, and this game is a microcosm of the season so far, I see a team that's in search of an identity. Last year's team, if the game was close going into the second half, you just felt like they were going to come out and win that game. It's the opposite this year. They've had some decent first halves, not great, but some decent first halves against some very, very good teams. And in the second half, everything just falls apart for a litany of reasons. It's a team that has been playing better defense, but again, I wouldn't say it's a defensive identity. It's a team that was supposed to hit shots, but we didn't see that yesterday. They had a hard time getting good looks, let alone hitting the shots. And so until this team kind of finds their niche and figures out what their identity is, it's going to be more of the same. I mean, the schedule gets a little bit different now as we get into Big East play, but the off season, right, the preseason, it's been nothing short of a disaster.
I mean, you're 11 games into the season. St. John's is 7-4. And the fact that you're still desperately searching for identity questions is very alarming. Zach, you were on press row in Atlanta. You saw firsthand how different this Kentucky team looked with Jaden Quaintance on the floor, as well as Jalen Lowe, who exited basically 7 or so seconds after he entered. Missed the entire first half with that shoulder injury that got re-aggravated. But then he came back in the second half, flipped the game upside down. What was your take in general on this game, the outcome, and how St. John's looked in the 40 minutes in Atlanta against Kentucky?
Yeah, look, Kentucky looked like a top 15 team in that second half, and St. John's right now is not equipped to beat a team like that, especially not away from home. Um, you know, Quaintance was terrific, but Lowe was the game. I mean, completely flipped the game. Creating, making shots, making plays for others, just opened the court completely and kind of showed what St. John's is missing. I mean, that first half, St. John's really should have been up more.
Yeah.
They did not play well offensively. The defense was awesome, but they did not play well offensively at all. And really, since Baylor, they have not played. They have not played well offensively. It's weird. They were really good. I thought the offense was pretty good even against Alabama. Obviously, Alabama's not a great defensive team, but the offense was good against Alabama, very good against Iowa State, who was a terrific defensive team. Awesome against Baylor, who's not a great defense team, but they were awesome against Baylor. And really, these last 5 games, the offense has been bad. And I don't want to put it on one guy. It's not about one guy, but Bryce Hopkins' play falling off to me is you can make a direct connection with the offense because the last 5 games Hopkins has not played well, and earlier in the year he wasn't just scoring, he was distributing. He was getting like 3-4 assists a game, and and lately that's not happening, and the offense is really really struggling. The ball movement's been bad. You have Ian Jackson playing point guard, Dylan Darling. I think that's obviously an issue too. They need to kind of just really define roles more. I get Darling was really good in DePaul, but I still, I'd asked postgame, I still didn't quite understand why Ian basically didn't play in the second half. I do think Ian Jackson is getting better, which yesterday Pitino touched on when talking about they don't really have a point guard.
Yeah.
But did touch on like Ian is getting better.
Yeah.
I don't think there's any question.
I think Ian looked pretty good yesterday. He wasn't terrible. I think especially in that first half.
Yeah, I mean, first half I thought he was pretty good. But yeah, I mean, like Kentucky looked like a top 15 team, and St. John's didn't look close to it.
All right, Kevin, coming into this game 2 days prior, Kentucky sources from all over started confirming that Jaden Quaintance was going to make his season debut against St. John's. This seems to always happen, but he made an impact that the moment he came into the game, a bank jumper, a block on the other end, he finishes with 10 points, 18 minutes, added 8 rebounds, 2 blocks. Why did St. John's have such a problem with him? What did Kentucky do with him and their bigs to neutralize St. John's front court of Ejiofor, Prey, and Hopkins and Mitchell that were held to 9 of 27 from the floor?
I think it's an overarching problem. And for as good as Zuby Ejiofor is, and for as aggressive, and he's the captain, and for all that stuff, he's playing out of position. Like, he's not a center. Whatever they list him at, 6'9", like he's more of a 4. And when he's going up against these 7-footers, he's at an athletic disadvantage. And the entire team is at an athletic disadvantage. In previous games, whether it's Iowa State or Baylor out of the Big 12 or the SEC games against Alabama, Auburn, and Ole Miss, I never really thought like, okay, these teams are from these really good conferences. They have these really good teams, and they just have incredible athletes that overwhelm St. John's. And that the first time I ever thought that was against Arkansas last year, right? But very early in this game, it was like this. And Dave, I even told you this last week. This is different. Kentucky has different horses than all these other teams that they played already. I mean, these guys were just really suffocating from the early going, and you saw it with 3 blocks in the first minute and a half. And it was like, this is different for St. John's. They're not used to this, and they have good players, they have athletes, but they have athletes that win Big East games. They are at a significant disadvantage when they're going up against athletes like Kentucky has, and you saw that with the front court, especially Zuby, who really doesn't struggle a lot against really good opposing bigs, but he sometimes couldn't even get a shot off when he was matched up against Queens.
Kevin, I don't disagree with you, but I want to challenge you there because this schedule was made because Rick Pitino saw what happened against Arkansas and said, okay, we're not going to be put in that kind of position again. So matchups against Alabama, Iowa State, Auburn, Kentucky, Ole Miss, Baylor are supposed to get you ready for the size, the physicality of what you're going to see in a Kentucky game. There was a reason, I think, that why this Kentucky game was placed at the end of this non-conference schedule. And the fact that they looked, again, unable to get anything going against their size and their physicality is quite the indictment, I think, of this staff, of this team, just not being ready or unable to get anything going. They looked, again, it looked like the Arkansas game in the sense that they looked like they never saw this kind of size. And of course, Kentucky's bigger than probably everybody else in the country. But I thought that you were scheduled all these opponents to get you ready for this kind of a game, and they looked completely outmatched.
I mean, yeah, but the one thing I'll say, and you kind of just touched on it, is that those games were important and those teams were good, but they're just a different animal than Kentucky. And I know Kentucky's had their problems. They're not a great shooting team. When you have the two guys that your two most important players who have been out due to injury, you look different. But like even during their struggles, Kentucky wasn't this great defensive team. I mean, look what Gonzaga did to them. Look what Michigan State did to them. Now, Carolina was a rock fight. Indiana was a rock. The Indiana game, actually, when you go back and look at it from a Kentucky perspective, was almost a carbon copy of the St. John's game. It was a first half where they struggled and trailed at halftime.
Yeah.
And then in the second half, it was like the dogs were let free and they ran them off the floor.
And Jalen Lowe had a lot to do with that in the Indiana game.
Exactly.
Big difference.
So,
the Big Hit didn't play in Indiana, though. Let's not forget that. That's a big difference.
But like St. John's has athletes that will overwhelm other teams in the Big East. But when they get matched up nationally against teams like Kentucky, they don't have those type of athletes. At least that's what they've proven so far on the court.
Justin, this is basically worst case scenario for St. John's when curating this non-conference schedule. Losses to Alabama, Iowa State, Auburn, and Kentucky. Your wins are the lesser of your marquee opponents in Baylor and Ole Miss. That's not how you drew it up. Now you're sitting here asking questions about identity, as you immediately did. Do the players on this team want it bad enough? Hell, does Rick Pitino have another "where's your toughness" speech in his back pocket? Because if there's any group that needs it more than ever, it's this team right now coming off of that performance in the second half in Atlanta.
That is the question. And while I was happy to see Ian Jackson lead the team in rebounds yesterday with 6, Ian Jackson led the team in rebounds with 6. And so it's like a double-edged sword. Last game, Shannon had 9 boards. Now Jackson has 9 boards. So the guards are starting to rebound the basketball. But to me, the biggest takeaway was Kentucky's ability to just impose their will physically in the second half. Every time Kentucky missed a shot, it seemed like they were getting the ball back or we were turning it over. It was just a confluence of events of 20 minutes that was just a nightmarish scenario. And so that's why it goes back to that whole identity. We obviously, Pitino wants them to rebound the ball, crash the offensive glass, not turn the ball over. And it seems like we do these things in spurts, but we can't put the pieces all together, which is why we're losing these games against top competition from around the country. But to your point, and Kevin, I think you alluded to this earlier, the Kentucky team that you saw yesterday is a far cry from the Kentucky team a month ago. It's not an excuse. It's just the reality. What does it mean? St. John's hasn't beaten a top quality team, but anyone who thinks that this Kentucky team is not a top 15 team, like Zach said, is deluding themselves. This is a really good Kentucky team who's about to go on a run.
But then the counterpoint to that is, well, you were supposed to be a really good team and you're supposed to beat some of these guys. That Iowa State 1-point win, Kevin, I know this has been a big point of yours. That's going to be that one game that St. John's looks to all year that they wish they had. Again, like we went into this game saying, win the game. Like, of course, Jaden Quaintance gets healthy to play this game. Of course, Jalen Lowe comes back in the second half with his shoulder magically popped back into place after he ran by the sidelines saying, "Oh my God, it popped out." That's what happens when you're St. John's. Of course it does. But the fact is that this was another game that St. John's could have had, should have had. They were favored up until I think about an hour or two before the game. And they did it. And they lost. And the way that they lost is really discouraging. And there's a lot that went into it, and most of it comes from toughness and this complete inability to match up with Kentucky. And there weren't adjustments made also. There wasn't a difference. My biggest issue is, why did Oziah Sellers and Josan Sanin, two of your best three-point shooters, guys who are shooting over 40%, how did they only take three-pointers all game? Oziah Sellers took 1 3 all game. Josan took 2. Nothing was ran for him. Zuby Ejiofor took 5 threes in the game because they were daring him to shoot and pulling him out. So, why aren't St. John's staff or whoever is responsible for drawing up the offense, why aren't they drawing things up to get their guys better looks? It's very concerning. It's scary.
I don't know if it was not drawing up looks to get them shots. It was they were aware and they were cognizant of Kentucky's size, that they couldn't get shots over them. That was the biggest thing. It wasn't that they weren't drawing up plays for them, because there was a couple plays where Sellers was coming off of a screen and they got him the ball, and pick a defender for Kentucky was right in his face and he couldn't even pull the trigger to attempt a shot to get it over them. That was the biggest thing. And then Sanin, I think, whether it was from the bench or it was him in his mind, he was like, okay, I can't get any of these shots off. They keep fouling me. Let me go to the basket and get fouled, because that was the best offense in the second half.
And
it was
Josan
Sanin driving and going to the free throw line.
And kudos to him, because he was 12 of 12, I believe, from the free throw line. So amazing job for that. Again, St. John's went to the line and used that to their advantage. So great. But again, from just the skill set point of view, guys weren't able to get looks. And I of course, Kentucky's size has to do with that. I just think that you have to start figuring ways out to get some of these guys. And we're talking about the rest of the season now. You have to figure out how to use guys' individual skill sets better on this team.
I think
I agree.
Go ahead, Zach.
I agree with that. To me, the big issue they have, and look, we'll get into the whole point guard thing, is they don't really have guys who break people down outside of Ian. And that, if you look at where a lot of Kentucky's offense came from, it was Low getting in the lane, creating off ball screens, and St. John's doesn't have that. Sellers is a spot-up shooter. Sanin did a good job getting to the line, but he's not really a guy who's breaking people down. Really, usually, earlier in the year, when their open shots are coming from, was the forwards creating, because they were getting past guys or in the post and kicking it out. And yesterday, you really didn't have that. Hopkins right now is a mess. Kentucky really didn't have to double much because of their size. That to me is the crux of the issue with the offense, is they don't really have breakdown guys. Now, I think in the league play, it's going to be a little different, because teams can't really won't be able to handle St. John's inside. And so you're going to have more double teams and more opportunities for the ball to be kicked out and open shots. And I think Darling can be more effective with dribble drives and ball screens in the league. But against against an elite defense, and with Quaintance, Kentucky's got an elite defense.
Yeah.
Let's not forget that. So that to me is a big part of the problem, is they don't have breakdown guys. Last year you had Kadari, even RJ and Davon, and that was a lot of Zuby's success too. Was he was open all the time because teams had to help off for dribble penetration. St. John's had guys who got in the lane. They don't really have that outside of Ian, and Ian is, he's learning how to be a point guard, and that's kind of taking away to me a little bit of his aggressiveness and and his slashing.
Let's talk about Ian. Let's talk about the point guard situation. This was probably the biggest revelation that came out of the game at the post-game press conference and the media scrum afterwards that both of you were involved with. I will preface this with saying that I don't think Ian Jackson was the biggest issue in the Kentucky game, but the point guard situation as a whole is clearly affecting the general identity on this team. Zach, I think what you just said really hits the nail on the head. After the game yesterday, Rick Pitino acknowledged the issues that many fans have noted. We've mentioned it here. We've talked about it ad nauseum since April. That this team has a major hole on its roster and that the staff did not do a good enough job of finding their lead point guard, a physical point guard, and now they're having to basically figure it out. So bear with us here. We're going to play 3 clips back to back to back. They're all from Rick Pitino in regards to the point guard situation. It's about the disappointment of the loss, calling this team decent, but not great, the staff not getting their big-time point guard, and then our friend of the show, Roger Rubin, asked Rick about the offseason comments regarding where Rick said the point guard position is dead. We were on this podcast basically not agreeing with Rick. And then saying that, Ian being anointed the starter hasn't really worked out, so his comments on that. And then, Kevin, I believe you got a quote out of Coach Pitino afterwards as well, to where he mentions the point guard position being a weakness of the team and having to figure it out because Ian is playing out of position and Darling's size. So here are those clips. Let's take a listen.
Well, Roger, what would you like me to say? I'm waiting for Tiny Archibald to come back. That's what you have to do when you don't have one. You make a positive from a negative and say we got to do it collectively as a team. So what you want me to just complain and get their confidence down? Is that what you're looking for?
No, I'm just looking down.
Well, that's what it is. We don't have it, so we've got to make sure the other guys can bring it up, do the job. That's our fault in recruiting. We lost out on 4 different big-time point guards that we went after, and we got to make the best of a situation by collectively other people handling the ball and bringing it up. I wasn't saying that it was a rosy painting because of having no point guard. It's just that's what we had to do. So I'm not going to get negative and just say what we don't have. We expected Dylan Darling to be a backup, and we lost all our recruits in that position, and we gained another position. So just got to make the best of it when that happens. It's just like an injury. You have a key injury. Kentucky has a key injury to Lowe. And what do they have to do? They have to just make up for it. Now he comes back, they become much stronger. We got to just become much stronger I can't do anything about the point guard spot. But we can do a better job with the backboard. We could do a better job of executing, blocking out, because we gave up 16 so many times. Like Ian's getting much better, but he refuses to block out, refuses on switches, and that's costing us a little bit. But he's getting much better in all the other areas. So I think, as he keeps improving, if we can get some wins, we'll have ourselves a respectable point guard. We've got weaknesses that we've got to get better at, offensive rebounding. We're playing without a true point. And we've got to keep making Ian better and better and better because he's got to get that position. Dylan is a really good guy coming in off the bench, but his size is a problem. And but he coming off the bench, he's great. So we just got to keep on working on that, stay positive. We were great last year. We're not great this year, but who knows by the end of the year if we can become. I'm disappointed in any loss, but our job is to get better. We are a decent basketball team. Nothing more than decent, and we've got to take decent to good, and that means you've got to play 2 great halves defensively. I think you can see that Jalen Lowe, him coming in, and we don't have somebody coming in like him. That's our fault as a staff for not having a big time point guard that makes people better. Now I will say that outside of the fact that he never blocks out, Ian Jackson is improving, getting better and better, but that's not his natural position. But he's doing a good job of getting better. But that's a big factor with us right now, and that's our fault as a staff not having a big-time physical point guard. So It's something that we look at, but we've got to make sure that we do it with other players. But more so than that, I think our front court is not. We have a thing called goes, where in practice, how many times the 3, 4, and 5 go to the glass. We want our 4s and 5s to go 80% of the time. And last year we were about 70. This year we're about 40%. So we're not going to the offensive glass and getting the missed shots back. So we got to keep on working on that. So to answer your question, no, I'm not disappointed. That's not my job to be disappointed or elated. My job is tomorrow to make the team better.
All right. This is the first time that this has actually been acknowledged. For the last few months, it's always been something. It's Darling's the point guard. Sellers is the point guard. Ian's the point guard. The point guard is dead. Everything you could think of. And as you heard Rick tell Roger Rubin, that listen, what do you want me to say when you don't have it? I think that was some interesting self-awareness from Rick, but I think it's very interesting that he finally acknowledged it. Kevin, what'd you make of this, and is it fixable?
Is it fixable? Yes, to a degree. Like, Ian Jackson is not turning into Steve Nash overnight.
Tiny Archibald?
He's not turning into Tiny Archibald overnight. So, like, I think he's going to get better. Darling at this level is a backup point guard. Like, that's what he is, and that's what he does best. And, like, he could have nights in the Big East where he gets really hot and has great games like he did against DePaul. But from a physical standpoint, he's overwhelmed in some of these games. The one thing, and I've been thinking about it a lot over the last, whatever it's been, 18 hours, is a question Zach asked at a pregame availability. I forget who it was, what game it was before, because it was in Queens. So maybe it was before DePaul or something like that. But it was he was asking a question about how last year people were complaining about Kadari, and we didn't see Kadari's best until after January. And Zach kind of asked, like, Rick, do you think the same thing could happen with Ian and Josan, where it's like after January, like the light bulb goes on and like they take off? And Rick, it was kind of like the first part almost to what he said yesterday, where it was like he stopped him and he was like, well, let's get it right first. Kadari was a man. Like, these guys are still kids and they're still learning to play basketball. Like, Kadari was a man when he got to St. John's. And I've been thinking about that over the past 18 hours. And that's what St. John's is missing. St. John's is missing a man to lead them on the court like a Kadari Richmond. And I really, for the first time in a game this year, I was like, boy, they miss Kadari Richmond here against Kentucky, because when Kentucky was going on that run, if you put the ball in Kadari Richmond's hands, he would just settle everybody down. He would run something, and he would either get a bucket or set somebody up, put it on a tee for an easy layup, and just settle everything down. And that's what St. John's was missing. St. John's was missing a man out there on the court to just say, hey, guys, we're good. Let's settle down, and let's get back to how we played in the first half. So I think, is it fixable? Yes, but Ian Jackson or Dylan Darling isn't going to turn into Kadari Richmond in the next 2.5 weeks.
Zach, how glaring of an issue is it, especially in a game like this where Jalen Lowe misses the first half, comes back in the second, basically is the reason they won? We've seen LeBaron Philon with Alabama destroy St. John's. Tahad Pettiford destroy St. John's with Auburn. Now Jalen Lowe, you could add him to the list of Johnny killers from that point guard position. St. John's has nothing close to it. So, like, you look and you see it working for other players. Your coach has acknowledged finally that it was a failure on the part of the staff for getting somebody like that. But now you kind of throw your hands up and you're basically praying that you can essentially make chicken salad out of chicken shit. I don't know if that's too harsh.
Here, this is what I'll say about it. Like, 2 years ago, they went from being a disaster this time of year to being a very good team in March that, to me, would have won a game, maybe even two, if they got in the tournament. Last year's team at this time wasn't very good either. Let's not forget that. Like, it's just his teams always get better. So I don't think this team now lately. I don't see the progress, but I do think they're going to get better. I do think they're still going to win a ton of games in this league. Um, like they need more out of the front court. There's no question they would need way more out of the way they're comprised right now. They're not going to beat a good team if Bryce Hopkins isn't productive offensively. They're just not. Like that they need more from him. And like I said before, it's not really necessarily fair to put on one guy, but he was brought in here to be a difference maker.
Yeah.
And lately he has been. Early he was.
Mm-hmm.
Baylor, he was awesome. Iowa State, he was very good. Alabama, he was very good. Like he's done it against good teams, and lately he's just not doing it. And the one thing, yes, maybe it's spin a little, but the one thing I will say is like the 4 teams they lost to, and especially the 3. Auburn, I think they would beat Auburn 7 times out of 10. And I think Auburn third game, third day, it's kind of a weird thing in a tournament. But let's take Auburn out. Kentucky, Iowa State, Alabama are all far better than anyone in the Big East outside of UConn. Those teams would be 7 to 9 point favorites against everyone else in the Big East. So
they might be a 5-point favorite against UConn too.
Right, and healthy.
Yeah.
So let's just before everyone's I'm seeing people say, "Oh, this team might finish 3rd or 4th or 5th in the league." Let's relax. They're gonna win. I'd be shocked if they don't win 15 league games. They're gonna win. They're gonna get better. They're gonna be in the tournament. Yes, it's definitely disappointing. Your preseason number 5, you're gonna be out of the polls on Monday. I think expectations need to be recalibrated, but just don't let's not just don't dismiss what happened his first 2 years, how the teams got progressively better. Their team is going to get better. You're seeing Ian Jackson getting better.
Well, Zach, I would say the whole getting better thing, the issue in the first year was that they just didn't have the quality wins come March. And so the last 2 years you've scheduled in a way that you can not be in that position again. And now you don't have those quality wins in the non-conference.
Well, I think Baylor
that's fine. That's one. And it's now a quad 1 win, which is great. And obviously we're talking about a down Big East. So that's, I think, where a lot of the frustration lies, is that they have not made the most of their opportunities when the schedule was supposed to be set up in a way that you weren't going to be in a potential situation. Now, I don't think they're going to be missing the tournament. I don't think that we're in that kind of dire straits. But the ceiling of this team has come down to the point where, if you run, I don't want to say run the table, but if you go 16-4 in the Big East and get to hopefully a Friday night or Saturday in the Big East tournament, are you better than a 5 to 7 seed? Which
you might not be, but that's that's the reality. I still prefer scheduling like this to the Mike Anderson.
100%. Let me just
better.
The fact that we're saying this and this is what we're quote unquote complaining about. We're such a far cry from this program being a doormat. But the fact is that expectations have changed.
Yeah, expectations were raised, and so far, it's been very disappointing. There's no arguing that, and I'm not looking to spin that. It has been incredibly disappointing. I wrote this Friday for Saturday that this game was a potential turning point, like Providence last year, and to be 3-3 in the non-conference against the high majors would be looked at as decent to solid, and 2-4 would be a massive disappointment, and it is. There's no question about it. It's been they really should have won that Iowa State game. They were terrible the second half against Auburn. To me, yesterday was more about Kentucky than St. John's. It really was. Right now, St. John's is a work in progress, and they're probably somewhere 25 to 30 in the country round right now. And Kentucky, what I saw yesterday, is a top 15 team. That, to me, yesterday was more about Kentucky than St. John's. And it is very St. John's that, of course, Kentucky's first full strength game is against them. It's so St. John's. I was stunned how much the big kid played. I thought he'd play 10 minutes at most. Coming off ACL surgery in March, the fact that he played as much as he did, he was good as he was. I mean, if I'm an NBA team, I know the draft's loaded. If he builds off that and has more games like that, I don't see how he's not a top 10 pick.
Kevin, I'll get to you right
he
now,
is
but
awesome.
just to give a little background on what Zach just said, I actually read, so Jack Pilgrim with Kentucky Sports Radio actually said that Quaintance was cleared fully at about the first week of December. He was pleading to play for the North Carolina game and the Gonzaga game. Kentucky said no, and they kind of had this next 3-game stretch, including St. John's, as the target date always for him, but he was pushing to going before, and so they were waiting for him to be fully a go with no swelling or anything like that in practice. And the last week has really been full go for him. And
right, because Pope had said Tuesday was his first day where he literally did full court.
And again, this guy tore his ACL in February.
And he moves so well without the ball. To me, that was the thing that was the most impressive. You knew he was a defensive presence. You knew he was a monster in terms of his size, but the way he moved coming, months off of ACL surgery, I was shocked at how well and pain-free. It seemed like he was just able to glide wherever he wanted to go. So kudos to him. Listen, on brand for St. John's, right? This is what we expect, but it doesn't take away the fact that St. John's had opportunities this out of conference schedule. They did not make the most out of them. And that's why you have to recalibrate at this point. We are not where we expected to be. We had a number 5 next to our name. There'll be no number next to our game this week. Now they got to really kind of run through the Big East like a buzzsaw if they want to salvage the season. And I think they will. It's just a different quality of team than they've played so far.
One thing I'll add, and Zach kind of touched on this with Providence last year. That was a year ago yesterday. And that was a turning point in the game, in the season, really, where they're getting drilled. And, we found out a week or two later that it was the "where is your toughness" rant at halftime from Rick and the speech that went viral. And they have this second half comeback, and Zuby hits the buzzer beater, and they go on to have this terrific season. And it was a turning point in the season for all the right reasons, right? And that's kind of was their identity the rest of the year, where they were this great second half team. No matter what they did in the first half, they were never out of a game. Right now, they're at a crossroads and a turning point in their season again. And are they going to turn right and build off this and get better off this? Or are they going to go the other way and not have the season in the Big East that a lot of us are anticipating? And the fact that those 2 games were on the exact date a year apart, I think is a little ironic, but can they have the similar type of trajectory after December 20th like they did a year ago?
Well, one thing I think let's also mention: Providence last year, Kentucky this year are.
I'm not comparing the teams.
No, but that's kind of my point. Is look who last year's teams beat. They didn't beat anyone nearly as good as this team has lost. The league was bad.
But in that Providence game, they're down probably close to 20. Fair. Nothing's going right. They flip a switch at halftime and they come out and win. Can this team do that now going forward?
I think that
goes back to the identity question. In other words, who is this team and how are they going to make a second half comeback? Is it a killer defense that we saw for 3.5 periods going into yesterday's second half? Because the defense had been great for that stretch with room to improve. Is it that somebody steps up on the offensive side? We talked about Jackson earlier. He made 2 beautiful give and go plays to Prey in the first half. He was able to get the ball to Prey in a position where he was able to get fouled, and Marino was having trouble keeping Prey in front of him, which I can't believe it, but that's what was happening. And so you're seeing signs of it, but they have not been able to put it together. Where they are a month from now, hopefully will be very different from where they are today, but I can understand why the fan base is not jumping off the ledge, but disappointed.
They're jumping.
I don't understand
I mean, let's be real with this fan base.
Yeah.
I mean,
Hold
this
on.
fan base this fan base thinks the season's over.
Yeah, that's for sure.
This fan base thinks they're finishing sixth in the Big East. This fan base who thinks they're owed everything and thinks, if St. John's doesn't win and go to the Final Four, it's a disastrous year. I mean, this fan
season.
base
There's a lot of basketball left.
This fan base that doesn't show up, that likes to complain nonstop, thinks it is owed everything. Let's be fair with this fan base. I mean, like, they're acting like St. John's needs a miracle to make the NCAA tournament now. I mean, there are some very good fans. There are some fans that really put money behind their words and deserve better. But there's a huge part of this fan base that does not deserve better. That all it does is complain. Doesn't show up, but loves to complain, and is basically killing the coach nonstop. There's a lot of people in this fan base that do not deserve better. Let's be fair about that.
I want to play what Zuby Ejiofor said after the game yesterday because it touches on what Kevin was asking. It's about the identity. It's about this team having to look themselves in the mirror and what they need to do to be tougher and turn things around.
That's a question that I feel like every person on the team just got to look themselves in the mirror and just realize that in order to have a successful season, we got to be able to make some changes, in our character and in ourselves personally. So everybody just got to be committed to doing whatever it takes to win, as we did last year. And I mean, today, like I said, it really didn't go exactly as planned as far as just being the more physical team and getting those key rebounds.
Justin, I want to ask you something because somebody texted me yesterday after the game and said, you know what this team is missing? Winners. Kadari Richmond, Aaron Scott, Davon Smith, they were all guys that were played in the after their conference tournament. They were guys that knew how to win. Obviously, they were older. Not a single recruit was coming off of a successful team last year. A bunch of guys, and we talk about identity, right? The guys that just know how to win. Is that something that holds water, you think, in the sense of why they are potentially not able to beat some of these higher end teams?
Don't put too much stock in that. Zuby Ejiofor is a proven winner. Bryce Hopkins had success at Providence. Obviously, they did not make it to a Final Four, but he had success there. You've got other players that have been around high major programs long enough, guys like Dylan Mitchell, Isaiah Sellers. I don't put too much stock in that. I think it goes back to that question of who's going to settle the team down, right? Kevin made a great point. Kadari didn't play great basketball until after the new year. But when he started playing basketball, he settled the team down. He would create a turnover or he'd go to the hole and get a layup. That's what the team needs. It's not a winner. It's the person who's going to step up when they need to just settle things down, either get a basket or get a stop.
Kevin, the great Mike Vaccaro yesterday asked a question to start his column, so I want to ask all three of you. Have the Johnnies underachieved across the first 11 games of the season, lugging a 7-4 record away from Saturday's 78-64 loss? He got the score wrong. It was 78-66. Or were they never as good as they were expected to be? Your thoughts on Vaccaro's question?
They've underachieved because I think you see the talent. And that they've been they were there against Iowa State. They're a defensive stop or a basket away from winning. They're up 11 in the second half against Auburn. They're up 10 late in the first half against Kentucky. They have a great comeback segment against Alabama, and they led by 2 or 4, whatever it was, with 7 minutes to go. So it's not like they're entering these games and they're down 10 points throughout and they're not competitive. They're there. They had a chance in all 4 games that they lost. They had a chance to win. So I think it's more underachieving.
Zach?
I think it's a little both. They've definitely overachieved. But I also, think some of this team was overrated, and at least we expected too much too soon. Like, you thought Ian Jackson, Joe Santana would be major difference makers, and they haven't been yet. They're also only sophomores, and I do think they're going to be very different players by March. They're both clearly getting better. It just might not be happening as fast as you want. Obviously the point guard issue. I think they were clearly overrated entering the year as number 5. I don't think there's any question about that, but they also have underachieved because, like, you can look at some of how they played earlier in the year with Alabama, Iowa State, Baylor, even Auburn, where they weren't even playing great and they were up 11. Like, they should be better than this. And lately the front court has not been good.
Yeah,
front court's got to be better. There's they have to be better. I definitely, and to me, it was a warning sign when they were up 18 over DePaul and didn't put them away.
Mm-hmm.
It's DePaul at home. DePaul's not good. They're like half this league. They're just not any good.
And they
the
couldn't
fact
put
that,
them away.
Right. And that's it. Like I had mentioned, like the offense since Baylor has just not been good. It's just hasn't been. They've been winning games because their defense has been pretty good and not great, but it's been much better. And that's why they had won 3 in a row. It wasn't because of their offense. That's for sure.
Justin, overrated, expectations too high. Now we actually hear about Rick acknowledging the point guard issues. So, like, the fact that we hear that now, the roster construction, the pieces here seemingly not fitting together as well. So, for you, as somebody that goes to every game, somebody that was with me at that Providence game last year, where everything changed, is this team that is being held to last year's standard? I think it's unquestionable that they've underachieved, but can we say now that they were overrated, or were they never as good as they were expected to be?
I think that they were slightly overrated to start the season because they were not top 5 good then, and they're losing these games with leads often, going into the second half. And you mentioned the DePaul game, but it was really the same thing in the Ole Miss game. They couldn't put Ole Miss away either at home in front of the Garden crowd. So you're seeing this trend that they either hold on and win these games, or they give up the lead and they lose these games. Regardless, I think they are slightly overrated. I liken this team to Rick's first year. More talent for sure, but that team was a very different team when they were playing UConn in February than they were early on in the season, where they were playing nobody and winning games by, a half dozen points. The grass is going to be greener after the new year, but the question that we have to ask is, what is the upside, right? Like, maybe they don't go 18-2 in the Big East this year. I think that 15-5, 16-4 is the likely scenario, and they're going to make the tournament, and then we see what happens. But the reality is it's taking longer for this team to come together than we had hoped, which is why they weren't top 5 to start the year.
I'm curious, and I think this all ties together. Zach, you've been harping on Bryce Hopkins, who's been pretty dreadful for the last 5 games. He had 13 points in this game, but 8 came with the game already over. Rick Pitino called him out publicly before this game. He has called him out a few times this year in regards to not being an alpha dog. He asked him to change his personality on the court. And, the first play of the second half, he drives aggressively, gets a layup, and then poof, he disappears. What's going on? Why is and Hopkins has looked good in spurts. He was really good against Baylor. There's been games where he looked like sophomore at Providence.
No, Earl. I mean,
So what's
first
going
6
on?
games,
Why?
yeah.
What's happening?
I mean, it's a good question. I asked someone yesterday, like, does like the stuff from Pitino bother Bryce? Does it motivate him? And they're like, yeah, it doesn't. He's hearing worse behind closed doors than what Pitino's saying to us. Like he, the kid knows he's got to play better. I mean, it's a really good question because first 6 games he was as good. Could argue he's their best player.
Yeah.
Like he was really good for the most part. He wasn't rebound. That's to me the biggest surprise with Hopkins. Yes, the offense, but like he's not rebounding. He was the guy who would get you 8, 9 rebounds at Providence. Here he's getting 4.
He's averaging 4.4 on the year.
That's been big. Like he's got to rebound better. But yeah, I mean the way they're constructed, they need playmaking out of their athletic forwards, and like lately they're just not getting it, and so like that's limiting. That's limiting the open shots, and I do think this is something that's going to get better in Big East play because, like I said, the very few teams are really going to be able to handle St. John's front line, and so they're going to have to double, and it's going to create openings. But yeah, they need more out of him.
What do we make of the Zuby Ejiofor, Dylan Mitchell, and Bryce Hopkins being 3 of the 4, the 3 leading assists guys on this team? I mean, we talk about playmaking. Like these guys are averaging just over 2.5, just under 2.5 assists per game, but the guards aren't distributing the ball well. I mean, Darling has 2.3, which is the same as Bryce Hopkins. They've got to figure things out. The identity of this team has deeper rooted issues than just toughness. There's a lack of playmaking. I think there's guys that are, like I said, not being used to their skill set. Dylan Mitchell, I know, is not going to be somebody that fills up the stat sheet, but like even in like a game like yesterday, he doesn't see me. He kind of like was fading away too. And in a game where Zuby Ejiofor has his hands full with Jaden Quaintance, Malachi Moreno, these bigs for Kentucky, there wasn't a lack of help from the interior. It's pretty concerning.
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt. I mean, the front court is not playing great right now. There's no question about it. They're just not playing well. And yesterday was another example of it. They need more out of these guys. They do. And look, like I mentioned with the guard, like they have guys who can shoot. They don't have playmakers in that backcourt for the most part. Ian's trying to get better at it, but they don't have playmakers. And so you need more out of your athletic forwards to be playmakers. And lately, you're just not getting a lot out of that.
Kevin, I mean, St. John's holds Kentucky to 25 points in the first half. They scored 16 points on 11 Kentucky turnovers. In the second half, just 5 turnovers and let Kentucky score 1 billion points. St. John's only had 2 fast break points in the entire game. This is a team that's supposed to be playing fast and run. They shoot 17 for 51 from the floor, 5 of 19 from 3. They got outscored 40-10 by UK's bench. They got out-rebounded 39-28. 16 second chance points to Kentucky, 12 in the second half. Kentucky grabbed 48.5% of their missed shots against St. John's. What's got to give for things to flip now that conference play is here? I mean, St. John's has a game against Harvard on Tuesday, and then it's conference play.
I mean, you played the sound from Zuby earlier, and I thought it was telling where it's like everyone has to look in the mirror. And I don't think that's necessarily something we've heard from him before. And you have to put guys on the floor who are willing to do what you're asking them. And I thought Ruben Prey yesterday was a guy who was doing that. And after he got in the dust up, if you want to call it that, where it was the foul, and then it was double technicals, and it was reviewed, and he got a flagrant. And then once he came out after that, he didn't play again until the game was decided. And I mean, I thought, now was he pulling down all these rebounds? No. but I thought he gave you a toughness
Yeah.
that they necessarily didn't have earlier in the first half. And is playing him with Zuby something that they haven't done a lot? Is that a remedy to try to fix some of these rebounding problems and the physicality issues that they talk about and this toughness? Like, is that something that fixes it? I think it could be. So you have to play guys who are willing to do the dirty type of stuff that you have to do to be a gritty team and win basketball games.
66 points is the second fewest of St. John's season after scoring 63 against Ole Miss. They won that game. Their non-conference is finishing at 2-4 against high major competitions. They're going to be unranked on Monday. Justin Otega-Owe looks like an All-American against St. John's. 20 points. 11 points in the second half. He took over that early. And how about this? Cam Williams, the younger brother of Greg Williams, who played for St. John's. 11 points in the second half. 2 long back-breaking threes. And that went with Jaden Quaintance had 8.6 rebounds, 1 block, 14 minutes. Jalen Lowe, 13 points, 3 rebounds, 3 assists. How do you move on from a second half like that where I think the entire country, and you heard me say this a few weeks ago, is calling St. John's a paper tiger, is calling St. John's the most overrated team, is calling St. John's and saying basically where does this team go from here? How do you move on? You know, against Harvard, you're going to get what, a 20, 30 point win. You have to. You got to fix some metrics numbers. You better destroy them, and they likely will. What has to be fixed before conference play?
Zuby said it right. You got to look at yourselves in the mirror. And Rick Pitino has a difficult job, not just in terms of getting the team to play better. That's obvious. But he has to he's got a fine line between riding them so hard that they don't just basically revolt and say, the heck with this, I'll move on to greener pastures next year. And at the same time, buying in that there's got to be accountability. It's a very tough thing if you're a coach. But that's why they brought Rick Pitino here, right? So they know what they're getting with him. And hopefully he has one of those speeches left in him, because the reality is they're going to beat Harvard, but they should not lose a Big East basketball game for many, many weeks if you look at this schedule. I'm not saying they won't. I'm saying they shouldn't. And if they can go on a run, slowly but surely they'll start getting that confidence back, and hopefully they're playing better basketball along the way.
Here's Rick Pitino talking about the lack of physicality and how Mark Pope all week cited how physical St. John's were. It was funny because I was saying the same thing. Like, St. John's was being described as this big physical team by Kentucky, and meanwhile it's Kentucky that was the more physical team here. Here's Rick.
I think the players see why they're losing from a physicality standpoint. Mark was. The one thing we complain about as coaches is we're not very physical. Our guards aren't very physical. Our bigs aren't very physical. That's probably a major weakness of our basketball team. And Mark was saying, they're so physical. And it was just the opposite. I was kidding him last night. I said, Mark, obviously you haven't watched us play.
I'm going to ask a simple question. In the movie A Few Good Men, there's a famous scene with Tom Cruise and Jack Nicholson about ordering the code red and pushing the button, essentially. Is it time to panic a little bit in Queens, Zach?
Nah, I mean, if you're talking about panic in terms of they're not going to be a 2 or 3 seed, then yes. But if you're talking about, can this still be a successful season? No. I've been over it about the teams they've lost to compared to what they're going to face in the Big East. They're going to win plenty of games in the Big East. If they start losing games in the Big East, then yes, it's time to panic. They're going to win plenty of games. I've said this before and I said this after Vegas, that St. John's could kind of emulate the Knicks season last year, where the Knicks regular season was underwhelming. There was not a lot of excitement going into the playoffs. People didn't think the team had what it took to do much. They get an injury ravaged Pistons team in the first round. They win a really fun series. Then they shock the Celtics and they get to the conference finals. And all of a sudden, everyone's excited and thrilled. And all people remember last year was they beat the Celtics and they got to the conference finals for the first time in forever. And and that's all that no one cared about about the underwhelming regular season. I can see St. John's going kind of following that path. Or at least I think if you're optimist, you can see that where let's say they go 15-5 in the regular season, people will say, well, so what? The Big East sticks, right? But, weird thing happens in March. You get a good matchup, high seed loses and, whatever, so no, I think it's way too early to panic about what this season can be. But I do think expectations should be recalibrated to let's have a good league season, get in the tournament, try to get a 6 or 7 seed, and then see what happens.
Kevin, this is obviously looking far ahead, but given the questions and the comments from Rick Pitino after this game, what do you think has to change recruiting-wise for next season?
Well, I can guarantee you they're going to have a true point guard. I've never been more sure of that before. They are going to have somebody who knows how to play point guard next year. It's interesting because, when you look at it, they have the funds, they have the Hall of Fame coach. Do they have the same facilities as these other SEC schools? No, although they do play in Madison Square Garden. But it's you need these 6'10" massive athletes. You need these 7-footers. And they necessarily haven't had that since Rick Pitino has become the head coach. I mean, his first season, they had a center in Joel Soriano, who was 6'11", but he wasn't this athletic freak of nature. Zuby, who is more athletic, is on the smaller side as a center at 6'9". So I think when you're looking into the future, I will guarantee right here on December 21st that they're going to have somebody who knows how to be a true dominant point guard next year. And I think it's going to be continuing to add guys like Dylan Mitchell, who are these superior athletes. Now, you hope that they can score the ball easier and more efficiently than a guy like Dylan Mitchell in terms of his shooting. But I think the roster is good enough in terms of guys that can play, the guys that have talent. It's that they're just missing the most important position that you need on a basketball team.
Justin, if you could point your finger to one thing as St. John stands at 7-4 following a 78-66 loss to Kentucky, what's the number one biggest issue right now for St. John's?
It's not the point guard play. Would it be nice to have that playmaker? Absolutely, but that's not the issue to me. They're starting to play defense at least a little bit. The issue is the offensive rebounds and the second chance points. Last year, we cleaned up the glass and imposed our will on the offensive glass. That's how we were able to break teams down in the second half, and that's been an unmitigated disaster so far this year. They're giving up second chance points. You said it best, 48% of their missed shots, they got offensive rebounds. That's the stat of the game. I don't care about the point guard play. If they can shore up the glass, Jackson can continue to get rebounds as he did this game. Sanin gets rebounds like he did against DePaul. I actually think the team still has a ceiling, but that has to stop. And if that happens, then you look at the point guard play, and maybe that takes them to the next level, but just clean up the glass on the defensive end. If that happens, they'll be in much better shape.
St. John's now comes home from Atlanta and will be back in the friendly confines of Queens for one more bye game against Harvard, and then it's Big East play. It's going to be Georgetown on New Year's Eve. Georgetown, who just took a loss to Xavier on Saturday night, and their head coach threw a water bottle into the stands that allegedly hit a child. I'm not sure if that's accurate or not, but Ed Cooley not happy after the game. Georgetown having their own questions for sure, but this Big East season is here, and the Johnnies have plenty of work to do. 78-66 loss to Kentucky. a bench that didn't really produce in this game, a Kentucky team that looks to be quite formidable, and one that should be rearing back into form here to end the season. Final thoughts, Zach, Kevin. I'm just curious from you guys, as two guys that are covering this program day in and day out, where things stand at 7-4, going into the last bye game, going into conference play. What's the word to the fan base? What's the word that you're leaving everybody with following what is most certainly a disappointing non-conference slate by St. John's?
Listen, I'm not gonna put a lot of stock in the Harvard game. It's the game before Christmas. They go on a 3-day break the day after. If they start slow, I kind of expect it. But I'm looking ahead now. Like the first week, 2 weeks of the Big East season is really important. Like, yes, you have a game under your belt already, but 3 of the first 4 games are on the road. 2 of them, it seems right now, are going to be quad 1 opportunities at Butler and at Creighton. So, like, I think you're going to learn a lot about this team in these next couple of weeks if they have the resolve and if they have the will to try to turn this thing around and stack decent wins in conference play. Because all of a sudden, that Butler and Creighton game have become pretty important, given the lack of quad 1 opportunities that you're going to have outside of UConn in the Big East. You might only have, outside of Connecticut, 4 to 5 other quad 1 games when it's all said and done on Selection Sunday. So they need to stack those, and they're going to have a chance in a couple of weeks at Butler and at Creighton.
Yeah, I agree with Kevin. I mean, those are big games, and I don't. They got to start. Look, to me, they got to start playing better offensively, because it's not sustainable to win games, especially away from home against decent teams with the way they're playing offensively right now. They've got to be better offensively. They need Bryce Hopkins to wake up. They need Ian Jackson to continue to progress. Obviously, they got to fix the defensive glass is a huge problem. They're one of the worst defensive rebound teams in the country right now, which it just doesn't make sense with their size and some of their athletes. I know it's part of it. They've played some really good teams, but there's no excuse. I mean, I think Zuby's right. They got to look in the mirror, and they got a lot of time. Look, you get Harvard Tuesday, then you have an 8-day layoff. You have the holiday. You go and play at a Georgetown team, you should be able to crush inside. They just lost at home to Xavier. Georgetown has just not been very good since Vince Iwuchukwu left with injury, with his having an undisclosed operation. I mean, they got it. Look, I said some of this yesterday. Just start playing better, start winning games, stack wins, and that everything will kind of take care of itself. You can't worry about you can't worry about what's happened already. It's happened. It's not changing. You can't go back. You got to play better. You got to use it as fuel, and they just got to start playing better. It's pretty simple. Like they gotta start playing complete games. They're not. I felt this even in those 3 wins. They were not playing complete games. They had good stretches. Like DePaul, they had a really good start. Ole Miss, they played very well defensively, although the offense was a mess. Iona, they didn't, they played in fragments. Like they're playing in fragments. They got to start playing more complete games.
Justin, final word. Is the sky falling?
Keep it short and sweet for a change. Not happy with the out-of-conference schedule, but the season is not over. The best basketball is yet to be played. Let's see where we're at in a month. I think we might be pleasantly surprised.
I'll leave you guys with this. I brought it up earlier. That Where's Your Toughness speech from Providence should be played on loop inside Carnesecca Arena and Taffner Fieldhouse for probably the next 2 weeks for these players to listen to. Rick Pitino is known to push the right buttons. Rick Pitino is known for finding the right motivation. He's never needed it more than right now. I think the theme of this episode has been the search for identity for St. John's, the search for grit, the search for fight, the search for, do you want to have these seniors go out in a whimper, or do you want to salvage a season that hasn't gone your way? But you're at a crossroads. You are at a inflection point of your season. It starts after the Harvard bye game. Do you have what it takes to turn it around? Do you have the guys who, to borrow a wrestling term, have the intestinal fortitude to change things the way that they should have been from day one? And yes, it takes time. Rick Pitino teams get better. But that time is now. It needs to happen. Everybody look in the mirror and see if you want it or not. Are you here just cashing a check, or are you trying to make a legacy and win a game and win a championship and do something in the postseason? That time is now. So let's see how St. John's answers the call. 78-66 loss to Kentucky. St. John's is 7-4. Not great. And things have to change right now. He's Zach Braziller of the New York Post. Kevin Connelly of Storm of the Paint. Justin Kramer. Thank you as always, guys, for joining me. Johnny Nation, as always, thank you for listening. We'll catch you next time.